Hello, and welcome to the Genome Space Orientation webinar and Introduction to the Recipe Resource. We will spend today's presentation answering questions such as, what is Genome Space? How do I use Genome Space? What are recipes? How do I use the recipe resource? How do I use a recipe? And how do I add my own recipes? Once we've completed the presentation, we will be answering questions from the chat. Moderators will collect questions from the chat during the presentation. To access the chat, please click on the chat icon. Please note that this webinar will be recorded, and we will send you an email once the recording has been posted to our YouTube channel. For those of you who are just starting out with Genome Space is a platform for integrative genomic analyses. It is a lightweight connection layer between tools and data sources with automatic format conversion. In this example, we show that analysis could be completed in GenePattern, then passed through Genome Space to another tool, Cytoscape. Genome Space also has cloud storage, which allows users to access data and tools from any location. In addition to the 30 gigabytes that Genome Space provides, you can also attach your own Dropbox, Google Drive, or Amazon S3 bucket to your Genome Space account. Currently, we have 20 tools connected in Genome Space. Some of these tools are data resources, such as InSilicoDB and Project Achilles. Other tools are workflow tools, such as GenePattern and Galaxy. Finally, we also have visualization tools such as Cytoscape and IGV. Genome Space has two major components. The first is the Genome Space website, which can be accessed at genomespace.org. This website contains a navigation menu, search bar, registration and login links, status notifications, and other social media components such as news highlights, blog posts, and a Twitter feed. The second component of Genome Space is the Genome Space User Interface, or GSUI, which can be accessed using the Login button. The Genome Space User Interface has many different features. For example, it has a navigation bar, a toolbar which launches all of the Genome Space-enabled tools, a directory view, and also a file system view of your files and folders. Genome Space looks very similar to the file browser on your personal computer. Another large component of Genome Space is the recipe resource. A recipe is a short, standalone workflow which documents the steps necessary to complete a common bioinformatic analysis, such as making a network from a list of genes. Recipes act as a bioinformatics laboratory manual and can be strung together to create larger scale analyses. Recipes are housed in the recipe resource, which is available at recipes.genomespace.org, or by clicking the recipes link in the genomespace.org navigation menu. The recipe resource also has two components. The first is the front page, which has a navigation menu, links to helpful recipe-related documentation, a search bar for browsing recipes, and social media components such as a featured recipe, documentation for creating recipes, and contributing to the Genome Space community. The second component is a list of the recipes in the recipe resource, which can be accessed through the search interface or by clicking the List All Recipes link. We will now do a live demonstration of how to use Genome Space and the recipe resource. Here you can see I have navigated to genomespace.org. This cloud icon will return you to genomespace.org. We have several navigation features in our navigation menu, such as what is Genome Space, information about the individual tools that are connected to Genome Space, a link to the recipe resource, additional documentation such as a user guide, a tool guide, frequently asked questions, presentations and videos, and end-to-end analyses. We also provide documentation for developers, such as technical documentation, source code and distributions, and developer support and feedback. We have a support page which allows users to sign up for different email forums, as well as an about page. If you are interested in searching the GenomeSpace website, you can do so in this search bar. Here we have a link to register for GenomeSpace, as well as the login link once you've registered. We also have a system status update, and we have information about how to cite our GenomeSpace paper, which was recently published in Nature Methods. Our news highlights and GenomeSpace blog provides information about upcoming events and interesting information. We also have a feed of our GenomeSpace Twitter, as well as links to Facebook and RSS and an email communication. Now I'll demonstrate how to use the GenomeSpace user interface. First, I'll click the Login button. As you can see, I've already logged in as the user recipe user. This menu here allows me to use many different features of the user interface. I can manipulate files. I can launch individual tools. I can view my current directory as well as other uploads. I can connect other storage such as Dropbox, Amazon S3, and Google Drive. I can manage my groups and private tools. I can link to the recipe resource, and there's additional help information as well. Here you can see this is the GenomeSpace toolbar listing several tools. If I don't see a tool that I'm interested in, I can scroll using the arrows. This is the file view in the GenomeSpace user interface. As you can see, I'm looking at my home folder. I have my personal home folder as well as Share to Recipe User, which will include folders and files that other users of GenomeSpace have shared to me. The public folder is a list of all folders by user that have been shared publicly. For example, the recipe data folder contains all of the data necessary to complete different recipes. So this is publicly available for everyone to use. If I scroll through these different folders, I can see those individual files that I can use to complete a recipe. If I go to my personal directory, you can see here I have an example private folder, which is gray and not shared with anyone, an example shared folder, which is indicated as shared by this green icon. And here I have a file, genes.gct. If I'm interested in adding a new file, I can do this using my local directory. Here I have two files that I would like to upload. I can upload them by selecting them, clicking, and dragging. I want to click and drag until my own personal folder is highlighted in green. Then I will get a notification that these files are being uploaded. So you can see here that these two files have uploaded. They are in my example shared folder. If I want to move these files to a different location, I can right-click, I can choose Copy and move it to a different folder. And you can see this file is being moved. If I return to my main folder, you can see now that that file has been moved. There are also many other file manipulation features. If I right-click, I can preview a file. This is the genes.gct file. I can also extract the rows and columns. This is a situation where you are slicing a file. If I'm interested only in the third column, I can select that and only select column number 3. If I'm interested only in this WT_FPKM, I can change the starting and ending row to only select that particular cell. I can also change the delimiters from tab to comma, space, and semicolon, or use other selections to select multiple columns. I can also convert this file. In particular, a GCT file can be converted to a GE Workbench file, a Cytoscape file, a Genomica file, a GeneSet tab, GMT, or GXP. I can do all of these things either by downloading the converted file to my local directory or by converting on server. If I convert on the server, it will automatically create the new file in my folder. I can also download this to my local directory, I can view the file link, and I can change the sharing permissions. Right now, I'm the only user who has access to this file. If I click Edit Sharing, I can either type in a specific username, for example, Recipe Data, which is another user. I can allow that user to read or read, write, and delete. I can also share within a specific group, or I can click Allow Public Access to share it publicly with all Genome Space users, allowing them again to read, write, and delete. I can add tags to my files, and I can also create an archive out of files, which is a zip file. I can also rename, as I demonstrated, copy and move files and delete files. In order to use Genome Space tools, there are several different ways to launch these tools. For web-based tools, I can click on the icon, and this will launch a new page which will load that tool, in this case, GenePattern. For desktop-based tools such as Cytoscape and IGV, clicking on the tool will download a JNLP file which I can then save to my local directory, and if I click that, I will be launching IGV. So here I have launched that desktop tool on my local machine. In addition, I can also launch on a file. First, by selecting the file and clicking Launch on File, or I can also click and drag to the icon to launch on that file. This will launch the web-based tool and then show me different modules that I can send that file to. In addition to this, I can also import files from a URL. Here I could type an HTTP or FTP URL, and that will allow me to import things to Genome Space directly. I can also import files to Genome Space from different data resources, such as ArrayExpress and Firebrowse. Next, I will demonstrate how to use the recipe resource. This is the recipe resource at recipes.genomespace.org. As you can see, I'm logged in as recipe user. The user credentials here are the same as for the Genome Space user interface. In addition, the cloud icon will return you to genomespace.org. This navigation menu has several features. The first is the Genome Space Recipes homepage, which is this page that we're looking at currently. Next is My Recipes. If I click on this, I will find not only the recipes that I've created, which I will demonstrate shortly, but also the recipes that I have favorited. I can favorite a recipe by upvoting the recipe, and I'll show you that shortly. I can click on View Live to look at that recipe. In addition, we have replicated the genomespace.org navigation menu to make it easy to access other navigation features, such as the user guide and tool guide, directly from the Genome Space recipe resource. If I return to the home page, I can demonstrate other features as well. We have the Genome Space Recipe Resource Guide, which includes information about how to use the recipe resource and recipes. It also demonstrates best practices for creating your own recipes, as well as listing community guidelines for interacting with other Genome Space users on the recipe resource. We also have a featured recipe, a section for browsing recipes, which I will demonstrate shortly, and information for how to contribute recipes. The first step here is to read the best practices guide and then submit the recipes on the recipe resource. Once a recipe has been submitted to the recipe resource, you can then publish it on our F1000 Genome Space channel. If you wish to do this, please contact us and we will help you publish your recipe on F1000. Finally, we have some additional community guidelines. Now I will demonstrate how to browse for recipes. There are two ways to do this. The first is to use a specific keyword, such as RNA-seq, and search for that keyword. The second way is to list all the recipes and then filter them, which I will demonstrate now. If I click List All Recipes, I now have a list of all of the recipes in the recipe resource. As you can see, each recipe has an icon. This icon indicates which tools are being used in that recipe. The recipe also has a title, which I can click to see the full recipe. Before I do that, I can click on the box of the recipe, and this will demonstrate a very short summary of that recipe, including a workflow image as well as text describing what that recipe is doing as an analysis. If I scroll down, I can also see the different tags that that recipe is being tagged by, the number of upvotes and the number of downvotes, the number of steps in the recipe, and again, a list of the tools. The cloud icon indicates that this is an official recipe that was written by the recipe resource team. Since other users can contribute their own recipes, user-contributed recipes will not have that cloud icon. I can also expand all recipe descriptions so that I can read brief descriptions of each recipe and compare and contrast them to see which one best suits my needs. In addition to searching the recipes by keyword, as I first showed, I can also filter different recipes by analysis type, data type, all available tags, and tool type. For example, if I'm interested in recipes that feature alignment, I can click the alignment tag, and this will dynamically change all the recipes so that they feature the alignment recipes. If I'm interested in recipes that are featuring alignment or differential gene expression, I can shift-click or control-click to list recipes that feature alignment and differential gene expression. I apologize, alignment or differential gene expression. Across different categories, it is an OR search. It is an AND search. So if I'm interested in recipes that feature alignment using, for example, Galaxy, if I click the Galaxy tag, now I've listed only the recipes that use Galaxy and feature alignment, or use Galaxy and feature differential gene expression. If I want to clear this search, I can either push the clear button or I can push list all and list all the recipes again. Now let's look at a recipe in detail. To do this, we will first click on the recipe title. This will take us to the recipe page. You can see here we have the recipe icon, which features the gene pattern icon and cytoscape so that I know this recipe uses those two tools. It also lists the recipe title and notes that this was created by the Genome Space team and recently updated. It also lists the different tags that are associated with this recipe and number of upvotes and downvotes. If I'm interested in saving this recipe to favorites, I can simply upvote the recipe and it will be added to my favorite section. Each recipe starts with a video playlist. These are individual steps in the recipe that have been combined into a playlist for easy viewing. You can either watch each of the videos individually or you can watch them together in one playlist. The summary section of a recipe will have a workflow image. The workflow image will show the input data needed to complete this recipe, as well as the analysis that's done in the recipe, grouped by tool, and finally an output. The summary section also includes text describing the motivation for the recipe. In this example, we want to know why are we doing differential expression analysis and why are we interested in protein interaction network analysis. If I scroll down, I can see the input section. This input section describes the input data that is being used and also describes where to get this input data if it's been publicly shared in Genome Space. Here, this data has been shared under the public folder, recipe data, and expression data. If you were to navigate to this folder in GenomeSpace, the user interface, then you would find these two files for your use. In addition, there is an output section. In this particular recipe, the output is a visual representation of a subnetwork of differentially expressed genes. Other recipes may feature other types of outputs. For example, if a recipe has the input is that you've created a different file, it will list that file name and a description of that file. The overview section describes the individual steps of the recipe as well as grouping them by the tool type. So for example, we will be completing 5 steps in GenePattern and then an additional 4 steps in Cytoscape. The individual steps themselves have a few different features. They have an icon indicating the tool being used and a brief title. There's also descriptive text briefly describing what that recipe step is doing. This descriptive text usually names a specific subtool or module that's being used and tries to describe the specific analysis being done in that one step. If you are interested in more details, you can click on the step title and you can find more information. This will include screenshots as well as detailed text. The screenshots and the text are paired. In this example, step 2A is to look at the input file name parameter and to change that parameter. Here we can see on the screenshot that step 2A has been highlighted. Once you have completed a step, you can collapse it. Alternately, you can expand all steps to see them all at once or collapse them. At the very bottom of a recipe is a results interpretation section. In this example, we have shown a network view as well as a subnetwork view. Depending on the output for a different recipe, this results interpretation section may look different. We will try always in a results interpretation section to describe briefly what we've done in the analysis, as well as provide our own interpretation for those results. The very bottom of a recipe also features a comment section, as well as a history section so that you can easily see when a recipe was last updated. If you've scrolled all the way to the bottom of a page, you can return to the top by clicking back to top in the navigation menu. You should note that this navigation menu will travel with you as you are moving down the page, and it will expand and collapse different steps. To demonstrate how you would use a recipe, I'll show you 1 or 2 short steps. We encourage users to read the full recipe and to decide whether or not this recipe is fulfilling your needs. If you believe that this recipe is of value to you, we suggest that you look at each individual step and follow the process and compare it to the tools that you are using. In this example, I would be using the pre-processed data set in the GenePattern tool. So I will demonstrate how to do that now. Here, I can see the pre-processed dataset screenshot and have the specific steps for that specific recipe. In the GenomeSpace user interface, I can launch GenePattern, and I can see that under the Modules tab, I should search for pre-processed dataset. If I load this module, I can now compare this screenshot to the screenshot in the recipe and determine which specific parameters I need to change. For example, the input file name parameter. To run the recipe, you would go through these individual steps and then compare the end result in the results interpretation section and see if you receive a similar result. Next, I will demonstrate how to create your own recipes. This again is found under the My Recipes section. Here, I have not created any recipes yet. First, I'm going to show you the documentation for creating a recipe. We encourage users to read through the best practices for creating recipes guide before they start creating their recipe. The Best Practices Guide lists how to submit recipes to the recipe resource and the F1000 channel, and also lists different recipe components and marks recipe components that are required. For example, this is describing what the title of a recipe should be. The recipe title should be descriptive but short. You can continue reading through this documentation to learn the different types of components that you should add to your recipe. We also list recipe standards, such as the word recipe should be lowercase, acronyms should be defined before use, so on and so forth. We provide HTML code in case you would like to differentiate between file names and parameters when writing your recipe. Once you've read through that documentation, you can create your own recipe by, again, navigating to My Recipes and clicking on the Add a Recipe button. Here, I'm creating a new recipe. I can add an example title, example tags, example summary, and an example input. These are all required, as you can see, by the star icon. If you're unsure what a specific parameter is supposed to contain, you can click the Information button. This will open a new page that will directly go to that section in the Best Practices for Creating Recipes. Once I've done this, I can also add a recipe step by clicking on the Add a Recipe Step button. Here, I'm again required to add a step title as well as select a specific tool. Here I will arbitrarily choose Cytoscape 3. If a tool is not available, you can also type the tool in the search box. Finally, we require content for your recipe steps. In this case, you would want to write very specific details about what the recipe step is doing, including highlighting different parameters and different areas where a user would click. You can also manipulate the text here, for example, bolding, changing the different sizes of the text, changing the color, so on and so forth. This is a good place to add screenshots by clicking on this image icon. Here we also have step number 2, in which case I'm going to arbitrarily choose MSigDB as my tool. You can also add a results interpretation section. Once I've created a recipe, I have two choices. I can either save the recipe for further editing, which allows me to return to the recipe later and change it, or I can submit the recipe for review and publication. If I submit the recipe for review and publication, this will be noted as pending, and the Genome Space team will receive an email. Once the Genome Space team has determined that this recipe is not spam, then the recipe will be made publicly available on the recipe resource. I can also go back and edit the recipe at that point. As you can see here, the two tools that I chose, Cytoscape 3 and MSigDB, have displayed their icons. Much of this content is automatically created for you. For example, the overview of the recipe steps is automatically created. The headers and the ability to expand and collapse is also automatically created. This concludes the live demonstration of the recipe resource.